January 13th, 2012, Friday evening, in Italy, the end of the work week. For the passengers on board, just another night of vacation. The time is just before 9:45 p.m. The cruise ship Costa Concordia is sailing along the Italian coast near the small island of Giglio. On board, there are more than 4,000 people. This is a routine evening at sea. Dinner is being served in the restaurants. People are talking, laughing, discussing their day. Some are making plans for excursions the next morning. On the open decks, passengers take photos of the lights along the shoreline. Others simply stop and watch the coast slowly pass by. No one is in a hurry. No one expects anything unusual. Costa Concordia does not look like a ship in danger. She looks like a place where everything is under control. The lights are on, music is playing, the ship is moving smoothly through calm water. At this moment, neither the passengers nor the crew consider what is happening to be risky. This is not a tense night. It is a calm, predictable evening. And that is exactly why what happens next will catch everyone off guard. Cruise ships are designed in a very specific way. They are built so that people stop perceiving them as ships as quickly as possible. There is no strong sense of movement, no feeling of distance, no constant reminder that you are surrounded by water. Instead, everything feels familiar. Corridors resemble hotel hallways. Lighting is warm and controlled. Music plays softly in the background. When an environment feels familiar, the human brain automatically categorizes it as safe. And once that happens, people stop actively evaluating risk. That is why, on board a cruise ship, passengers often feel calmer than they do on a plane or a train, even though, physically, they are in a far more complex and vulnerable setting. Costa Concordia was a relatively new ship. She was launched in 2005. At the time of the accident, she was only 7 years old, nearly 300 meters long, more than 1,000 cabins, restaurants, theaters, bars, swimming pools. This was not a ship designed to constantly remind you that you were at sea. It was designed to make you forget it. Large cruise ships are carefully engineered environments. They are built to feel stable, quiet, and controlled. Passengers are not supposed to think about waves or weather. They are not supposed to think about navigation, speed, or distance from shore. They are supposed to feel comfortable, relaxed, safe. Costa Concordia was marketed and experienced as a floating hotel, a self-contained world where the sea exists mostly as a view from the window. And that design philosophy matters for what comes next. Inside Costa Concordia, there were around 1,500 cabins. They were not all the same. Some had no windows at all. Others had small portholes. Many had balconies overlooking the sea. There were suites, family cabins, and single rooms. In practice, this meant that the ship functioned like a small city, spread across multiple decks, with people sleeping, dining, and relaxing in completely different parts of the same structure. In a system like that, information never moves instantly. Any message, any warning, any decision takes time to travel. And when something begins to go wrong, that delay becomes part of the problem. From a technical standpoint, Costa Concordia reflected that philosophy perfectly. She was equipped with modern navigation systems, radar, electronic charts, automated route monitoring. These systems were designed to reduce workload and increase confidence. They showed position, speed, distance, and projected paths. They made navigation feel precise, predictable, manageable. By every formal measure, this was a safe vessel, certified, inspected, operating under approved procedures, the kind of ship people trust without thinking twice, and that trust is powerful. Because when people feel safe, they stop questioning the systems that create that feeling. They assume the margins are larger than they really are. They assume that if something were truly dangerous, the system would make it obvious. Modern navigation systems are designed to create confidence. Screens show precise positions, clear lines, Distances measured down to decimal points. Everything looks calculated, predictable, and under control. But there is an important difference between control and understanding. Automation can tell you where a ship is. It can tell you how fast it is moving. It can tell you how far it is from shore. What it does not always communicate clearly is how quickly a situation can stop being safe. The captain that evening was Francesco Schettino. He was not a junior officer. He was not inexperienced. He had years of service behind him. He knew the ship. He knew these waters. He had sailed this route before. From the outside, there was nothing unusual about this voyage. Nothing that suggested poor judgment or loss of control. This matters, because it is tempting to explain what happened by pointing to one person, to imagine a reckless decision or a moment of arrogance. But that explanation is too simple. What happened on Costa Concordia did not begin with panic. It did not begin with confusion. And it did not begin with someone ignoring obvious danger. It began in a setting where everything felt familiar, where decisions felt routine, where confidence came not from bravado, but from repetition. For passengers, sailing close to the shore felt like a gift, something extra, something that was not written into the itinerary. It was not just a route. It felt like a gesture. Over time, the same thing happened for the crew. When a maneuver is repeated again and again without negative consequences, it slowly stops demanding attention. It no longer feels like a decision. It feels like part of the routine. And at that point, risk does not disappear. It simply becomes invisible. At least, not in a way that felt dangerous. Close enough for passengers to clearly see the shoreline. Close enough to recognize buildings, lights, and people. From the decks, it felt intimate. The coast was no longer distant scenery. It felt nearby, personal. Passengers enjoyed it. People took photos. Videos were recorded. Applause was not unusual. For many passengers, this became one of the highlights of the journey. On shore, people sometimes came out specifically to watch. A massive ship moving slowly past the coastline, lights glowing in the dark. It was a spectacle. And it was welcomed. Importantly, this was not a secret maneuver. It was not hidden. It was not framed as dangerous. It was treated as a gesture, a courtesy, almost a tradition. And that framing changed how it was perceived. Inside the ship, nothing reflected the potential danger of that moment. Restaurants were open, bars were busy, spa areas and pools were operating as usual. People were relaxing. The contrast between what was happening outside the hull and what was being experienced inside the ship was almost complete. And that contrast matters, because situations that feel safe on the inside are often the hardest ones to recognize as dangerous. And most importantly, this was not new. Similar maneuvers had been performed before. Not once, not twice. They had become part of the informal culture of cruising. And every time, nothing bad happened. No alarms, no incidents, no consequences. This is how risk changes its shape. When a risky action is repeated many times without negative outcomes, people stop seeing it as a risk. It becomes familiar, predictable. Eventually, it becomes routine. At that point, it is no longer experienced as a decision. It is simply how things are done. That evening, Costa Concordia was performing such a salute. Formally, the captain had the authority to adjust the course. There was no strict prohibition from the company. No system warning that this was unacceptable. On the bridge, everything looked normal. The ship was moving as expected. The instruments were calm. The coastline appeared exactly where it was anticipated. There was no sense of urgency. No alert demanding attention. This is the moment when the system quietly begins to lie to itself, not through malfunction, but through confidence. In accident investigations, one phrase appears again and again. It had worked before. And most of the time, that statement is true. Dangerous decisions rarely look dangerous in the moment they are made. They look like reasonable extensions of what has already been done many times. This is how risk becomes normalized, not through recklessness, but through familiarity. And once that happens, warning signs become harder to notice and easier to dismiss. At approximately 9:45 p.m., the ship came closer to shore than intended. The margin for error was thinner than anyone realized. Underwater rocks were closer than expected. The impact was sudden, but it was not explosive, not dramatic. The lights stayed on. The engines continued running. The ship did not stop immediately. On the bridge, there was no clear signal that a catastrophe had just begun. And that mattered more than the impact itself. Water began entering the hull. But the information reaching the bridge was incomplete. Each system reported only what it was designed to measure: flooding in one section, power loss in another, when no single display showed the full picture. From the instruments alone, the situation still appeared manageable. From the human perspective, it still felt recoverable. The disaster did not announce itself loudly. It unfolded quietly. After the impact, nothing changed immediately. The lights stayed on. Music continued to play. The ship still looked like a place where everything was functioning normally. And that is the most dangerous kind of accident. The one that does not look like an accident at all. Time begins to slip away long before anyone fully understands what is happening. The decisions made in those first minutes were not irrational. Stop the ship, assess the damage, try to stabilize the situation. On paper, these were reasonable choices. The problem was not intention. The problem was time. The ship began to list slowly. Not suddenly, not violently. Slow disasters are harder to recognize than fast ones. So evacuation was not ordered immediately, not because no one cared, but because the system had not yet accepted that this was a full-scale emergency. As the list increased, options disappeared. Lifeboats on one side became unusable. Movement inside the ship became more difficult. Passengers received mixed messages. Some were told everything was under control. Others were told to wait. When evacuation finally began, it was uneven and chaotic. Not because of panic, but because the moment for an orderly response had already passed. At a certain point, there was no longer a way to recover the ship. The list continued to increase. Power systems failed one by one. Control was not lost all at once. It faded. Costa Concordia eventually came to rest on her side near the shore of Giglio, partially submerged, visible from land. 32 people lost their lives. Thousands more experienced an evacuation that should never have been necessary. In the aftermath, investigations followed. Procedures were reviewed. The practice of close-to-shore salutes was banned. Captain Schettino was later convicted and sentenced to prison. But this was not the result of a single reckless moment. It was the outcome of a system that normalized deviation, a culture where small risks were tolerated because they had not yet produced consequences, where automation created confidence but not understanding. Costa Concordia did not run aground at 9:45 that night. She ran aground much earlier, at the moment when something dangerous stopped being called dangerous and started being called routine. After the disaster, investigations followed. Procedures were reviewed. Close-to-shore maneuvers were banned. Rules were rewritten. But changes like these always happen afterward. They rarely undo what has already been lost. And they almost never remove the human tendency to become comfortable with risk over time, because the conditions that lead to accidents are usually built slowly, long before anyone realizes where they will end. If you're interested in understanding what really goes wrong in major accidents, subscribe to the channel. More stories coming soon.